The topic for today's discussion is the issue of transparency, or the lack thereof, in promoting or hindering the sustainable development of mineral resources in Africa. Transparency in the mining sector is associated with the need to address general good governance when dealing with financial transactions, as well as the relationship with the environment and the local population. Our panelists will lead us in exploring the nexus between transparency in relation to various spheres that they work in. First, we have Mr. Briggs Bomba, the Programs Director of Trust Africa, Pan-African foundation that works across Africa to promote democratic governance and equitable development. Next, we have Veronica Zano, a governance research and policy officer at the Southern Africa Resource Watch. And last, we have Hebert McLeod, the country director of the International Growth Center for Sierra Leone and Liberia. I would like to thank you all for joining us today and hand over to Briggs Bomba. Briggs, are you there? Can you hear us? Seems there is a whole host of Zoom hiccups today. Veronica, can you hear us? I'm not alone in the ether. I can hear some movement.
Yes, hi, I can hear you.
Hi.
Awesome.
There is someone on the line that I can speak to. I was hoping that maybe you would go first until we get proper connection with Briggs and Hebert.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for also inviting me to be part of this very important and highly informative forum. Just to also reiterate that I'm with the Southern Africa Resource Watch, which is a non-profit regional organization that's working in the 12 SADC member countries. Our goal as an organization is to promote the transparent use and management of natural resources in the region. We are mainly working in terms of advancing key natural resources of minerals, oil, gas, timber, wildlife, and fisheries. The thrust of our work mainly is to provide credible evidence-based researches and publications. We also provide legal and institutional support at a continental level, that's at the Africa Union level and the Africa Mineral Development Center, at a regional level, working with the SADC Parliamentary Forum. We also work at the national level, working with different government departments that are responsible for the use and management of natural resources. We also work in terms of trying to promote capacity building and movement building of civil society, community-based organizations, as well as community activists. We also try to foster public dialogue through advocacy, where we bring together different stakeholders that are interested and also key in the use and management of mineral resources. So getting into the focus of the forum today, which is basically looking at the issues of transparency and accountability as a facet of either promoting sustainable development. With no doubt, I think this is quite given and known that Africa is a very rich continent. It has diverse minerals, which range from gold, chrome, diamonds, cobalt, the platinum group of metals, and so many other unexploited minerals. And I think what is much more of concern has been that the extraction of minerals at the continental level has been happening for decades. And despite the extraction of the abundance of these mineral resources, what is unfortunate is that resource-rich countries in Africa have unfortunately been characterized by poverty, inequality, and issues of conflict. And we have had various facets at the global level and even at the continental level being very concerned about why there's this paradox whereby despite the abundance of mineral resources, African countries are still at the bottom of the human development index. And as such, there have been various platforms and frameworks that have been born to come up with initiatives to ensure broad-based sustainable development from the mineral resources. The concept of sustainable development emanates from the World Commission on Environment and Development through the Brundtland Report, which notes that sustainable development, or which defines sustainable development as development that is that meets the needs of the present generation without also compromising the ability of future generations to come to benefit from the same resources. So when we talk about sustainable development in the mineral resource governance sector, we are saying it should be development whereby it should be economically, socially, and environmentally responsible towards the present generation, and also taking into consideration that the future generations should derive some benefit from the mineral resources that have been exploited or that have been managed, that have been possessed within host countries. And as such, what we've seen is that we have frameworks such as regional, continent, and global frameworks such as the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative that have been born with the intention of saying there should be transparency. I think the issue of transparency, which is the ability to be open by governments that have been entrusted to manage these public resources on behalf of the public, should be done in a manner that is open, whereby the public are given an opportunity to understand through access to information. And we're not just talking about information, that it should be accurate and timely on how decisions in terms of the use and the management of the mineral resources have been done by host governments within African member states. And importantly, at the continental level, the Africa Mining Vision is one of the broad-based frameworks that has been developed by African member states as a transformative framework hinged on transparency across the whole mining value chain to ensure that mineral resources are a catalyst for sustainable development. The management of mineral resources is done in a broad-based manner, not just in terms of providing linkages with other economic sectors, and also as facets of the social and the environmental side towards the extraction of resources. So I think how I'm going to tackle this particular topic is that the other panelists are going to be also talking about coming up with a different angle. My angle has been to profile what has been the reality or the impacts at present in terms of the African member states in advancing the nexus between transparency and sustainable development within the mineral resources sector. I think when we're talking about, like I said, Africa Mining Vision, which is the continental framework that I particularly want to make reference to, because this is a framework that African member states themselves have subscribed to and put together based on the present realities of what they've witnessed and what they see themselves as fundamental aspects that will promote them in terms of advancing this important framework. So the first aspect that we have seen is that I think there's been a commendable progress in terms of domestication of the African mining vision, which is hinged on ensuring that there is open governance in how minerals in those in countries minerals are used and managed. And according to the Africa Mineral Development Center, which is the main implementing organization of the AMV, as well as the Africa Minerals Governance Framework, which is the tool that is supposed to help member states to align their legal national policies to the Africa mining vision. There are about 32 countries that have managed to adopt in one way or the other the facets or the tenets of the Africa mining vision. And in so doing, I think we have also had, even at a global level, African countries subscribing to transparency and accountability initiatives that are aimed to ensure that the public is more involved in decision-making of how mineral resources are managed. And to date, I think we have 26 countries that have subscribed to the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative, that's the EIT, with Uganda being the newest African member states to be part of this very important initiative, where globally we have 54 countries. So you can tell that there's been an appetite by African governments to subscribe to the tenets of, or the principles of transparency and accountability in the use and management of mineral resources for sustainable development. However, when we look at the realities, there are still a lot of African countries that continue to be riddled by poverty. We have a few exceptions of mineral resource-rich countries like Botswana that have been able to optimally realize and translate this to broad-based sustainable development. And where is this all coming from in terms of, I think the starting point is that there's been limitations in terms of the legal and institutional frameworks regulating or governing the mineral resources at the continental level. We still have laws that are still archaic and that are not in touch with the current realities or the facets of good governance, such as transparency and accountability within the mineral resources sector. So for starters, what we have seen in the work that we are doing as Southern Africa Resource Watch has been that there has been generally limited transparency and accountability that is fostered across the whole mining value chain in terms of these laws and policies. So for example, when we look at the starting point in terms of the contract negotiation and the awarding of mining rights, this is still a process that is still largely non-competitive, done in secrecy. Those that are confined or provided with the mandate of awarding mining rights are still confined with largely discretionary powers, whereby the public do not have any access whatsoever to understand the terms and conditions that have been subscribed to in terms of the awarding of mining rights. And the result has been poorly negotiated contracts with, in some cases, terms and conditions that provide more as incentives to companies in a bid to attract foreign direct investment, and ultimately undermining most countries to be able to optimally realize resource rents that are critical in terms of providing sustainable development within the host countries. And I think what's more also importantly in terms of this issue is that the poorly negotiation of contracts has been done through non-competitive processes, the discretionary aspects. And what also fuels the poorly negotiation of contracts within most African states through lack of transparency has also been linked to issues of most governments not also being able to invest in conducting systematic and very detailed geological mapping and surveys of known resources. So without an ability of a country being able to understand the exact quantities and grades within the minerals that one has, this ultimately undermines the ability to negotiate properly. And also the discretionary powers, because of their whereby the public is mainly deterred from getting access to these contracts, which are not provided through whatsoever process, whereby the laws most of the laws do provide limitations of the public to access these mining rights, for example, the mining contracts. And as such, this opens up room for corruption, whereby some of the political elites have used these weak legal and institutional frameworks to promote, to actually negotiate. I think also importantly, the other issue that's also been very prevalent in terms of the limited issues of transparency within the sector has been issues of revenue mismanagement and inequality. Because of the failure of these legal and institutional frameworks that promote processes whereby there's disclosure of disaggregated data related to what has been the taxes paid by the companies and what has been received by the government. In most cases, there's been discrepancies. I think you've heard reports such as in Zimbabwe, where diamond mining companies have said they've contributed this and so much in terms of revenues or taxes, and the government giving a totally different figure, which is usually on the lower end. And this issue really presents a situation whereby there is illicit flow, financial flows that are going to be coming in terms of the treasury, as well as the centralized system that is mostly being around within the legal and institutional frameworks within the member countries. What we have seen is that this is still centralized. There is inequality in terms of the redistribution, especially in communities where mining is taking place. However, it is also important to note that I think milestones have been made in countries such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, to ensure that there is some form of equitable distribution within at different tiers of the government in terms of revenues from the mineral resources sector. And what is also very important is that most national budgets currently, when we look at African member states that have rich mineral resources, they are mainly financed by the sector itself, and that there's a bit of that is a big problem of sustainability, because it's mainly an issue of hand to mouth. So when we're talking about the concept of sustainable development, it means that the future generations are not in a way going to be able to also benefit once these exhaustible resources come to an end. And the result is that most countries, or those that do have actually currently, for example, sovereign wealth funds aimed to ensure that future generations benefit, they're still highly not functional. So this is a big contradiction in terms of the concept of sustainable development. I've 10 minutes, so I don't know if how far I am with the time, so I'm trying to really stick to my time. The other aspect that I also wanted to talk about is the issues of human rights violations that have been associated with the mining sector, and it's linked to transparency. I think when we talk about transparency and accountability, we are also talking about a very important principle of public participation. For the public to be able to effectively provide checks and balances and should ensure that the development of the extractive industries or mineral resources is done in an environmental, socially, and economical manner. They should be able to have access to key documents. So what we've seen is that whilst governments, most African governments, in terms of their legislation, they've tried to incorporate aspects that buffer communities and the citizens from the impacts that come from the negative impacts, mainly that come from the extraction of mineral resources. They still, commendably, there have been aspects of mandatory requirements relating to the undertaking of environmental impact assessments before mining operations, carrying out of social impact assessments, social labor plans in legislation such as in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi. I think this has been a very positive stride, because it also provides an opportunity for stakeholders that are interested and affected by mining operations to understand what could be the opportunities and also the challenges that can be associated in terms of the governance or the extraction of resources. But I think what is still a missing gap in terms of the transparency discourse has been access to those key documents whilst they've been produced. it is usually a rubber stamping process in most countries, whereby it's only a few individuals that have been involved. And the link then comes in with the human rights is that because of lack of access and accountability to those key documents, some mining companies are doing mining activities not in a responsible manner, and the result has been issues of forced displacements without fair and adequate compensation, issues of environmental mismanagement characterized by pollutions, environmental degradation, contamination of water and land, and ultimately affecting issues of food security and generally the livelihoods of communities living in these host communities. So I think what's more important is that I think with access to key documents such as social impact plans, as well as environmental impact assessments, these access to such documents helps then government, citizens, and also all other stakeholders to be able to play to monitor and see whether extraction of resources is being done in a manner that is sustainable. The fourth issue that I also want to talk about that has been a challenge in terms of promoting sustainable development related to mineral resources by African countries has been issues of limited economic diversification. The extraction or the extractive sector by its nature in Africa has been a raw material kind of industry whereby African countries are exporting the minerals that they are extracting in raw form without any form of value addition or beneficiation, which in a way undermines their ability to effectively garner on export earnings that come with value addition. And more importantly, there's been a lack of providing linkages of the mining sector with other key economic sectors. For example, agriculture, manufacturing. As I said earlier on, most national budgets right now are being mainly financed by the extractive industries. We have seen a collapse of other economic sectors, and therefore there's been a limited investment by governments or by countries within Africa to ensure that there is linkages of the mineral sector to other side stream, upstream, downstream economic sectors that are essential towards infrastructure development. That will be key in terms of even fostering issues of employment and livelihoods creation within the countries. Because by its nature, mining is not very, it doesn't employ a lot of people. It's highly mechanized when you talk about large-scale mining operations, but as compared to like artisanal small-scale mining. So the failure then in terms of making sure that there is that ability to promote linkages and foster diversification of economic sectors has been one of the key concerns that has not managed, that has resulted in Africa not really providing or garnering sustainable development as envisaged, for example, by the African mining vision. I think also another issue or the impact that has really bottled down in terms of what all these issues that I've been talking about has been the issues of how mineral resources, the lack of transparency has fueled resource conflict in some African countries. For the past 40 years, I think there have been a lot of civil wars in Africa, and if you look at the root of the problems or the conflicts, it has been in terms of the use and management of natural resources such as minerals, countries like the DRC, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Chad, and so forth. And it is because of the limited participation of citizens in the use and management of resources, whereby the public get a sense of being left out, and certain political elites usurping power and using it to their own advantage and to their own benefit. that stifles or that builds rebellion within the citizens. And I think whilst efforts have been made to ensure that resource conflicts are minimal, but you can see that there are some even new conflicts that are emerging within the continent that are sparing from mineral resource conflicts. And it's therefore integral that there is need for citizens to be able to play an effective role in terms of getting to understand and playing a very important role of checks and balances for that sustainable development. And there are some countries that have made some tremendous progress in terms of either subscribing to the EITI or even implementing their constitutions, as well as their revising their legal and institutional frameworks and incorporating the principles of transparency and accountability that are really also trying to make headway in terms of addressing some of these concerns that I raised. I think for now, I will close, I will end here, and then maybe I can take it up from the comments that will be coming in from the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Veronica. That was fantastic. It really did put into perspective the kind of overlapping elements and principles of good governance and how vital transparency is, especially in the African context. I would like to now hand over to Briggs Bomba. I think we have sorted out the connectivity issue, so let's see. Are you there?
I am here. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Let me turn
Thank you so
on
much.
my video. Yeah. Can you see me? Okay, wonderful. All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to your audience. As introduced, the name is Briggs Bomba. I am with Trust Africa, which is a Pan-African foundation that is headquartered in Dakar, Senegal. And one of the areas that we are working on is the area of equitable and sustainable development. And within that, the extractive sector is a key area of focus for us. So the brief that we received was to take 10 minutes to speak to the forum with regards to the issue of transparency and its importance or non-importance in the transformation of the mineral sector in Africa. If I had known that in the CAP 10 minutes is quite relative, I would have developed a much longer presentation. But I'm happy to say most of the elements that we were going to touch on have already been covered by Veronica. So in the time that I have, I will locate the discussion within the framework of the Africa Mining Vision, as Veronica had already started to do. And secondly, highlight specific Africa Mining Vision pillars that are relevant to the discussion on transparency in the mineral sector. And then thirdly, I would like to highlight some specific mechanisms through which illicit financial flows take place that again will be addressed by a much more transparent setup. And then obviously, lastly, just to speak to some of the areas that we can act on, because the assumption is always that these forums are meant to catalyze action so that we can provide solutions and not just to debate. And in taking this further, and by just way of general remarks, I would like to affirm, Veronica's point that transparency is at the heart of the agenda to translate Africa's vast mineral wealth into well-being, development, and even economic transformation. And to this end, I think we must acknowledge that civil society and international development partners, research institutions, and various stakeholders are already doing a lot of work, and some of which we are really seeing results to ensure that there's greater transparency across the full, extractive sector value chain. I think the point that I can bring in at this point is that the conversation to date has mostly been framed with African governments in mind, particularly the distrust that is very justified with what African governments do with the extractive sector revenues. So you find out that most of the initiatives, including the ones that Veronica has spoken to, revenue transparency initiatives, and the initiatives that are looking at ensuring that we know what the corporate actors in the extractive sector have paid to our governments, so that we can then do our accounts and see if it is the same as what our governments are declaring. So, and I think in Veronica's presentation, she spoke a lot, in terms of that dimension. But I think the other dimension that is even more important, and which will be the focus of my own input, is transparency with regards to what the corporate sector declares in the first place. And this is where the issue of illicit financial flows, which is the area that I'm going to really focus on, comes in. So we are, asking the question: if you declare that you gave the Zambian government $100 million as your tax contribution, royalties contribution, and all the other dues, is that really what you should have, given in the first place? So there's an aspect there around putting the spotlight on the corporate sector. And as I said, I think when we are talking transparency, this is relevant across the whole value chain. So not just when we come to the point of taxation, it's all the way from when you're negotiating the contracts, during the exploration phase, it's relevant during the operation, it's relevant during the trading phase of extractive entities. It's also very relevant even during the decommissioning phase of mines and other extractive outfits. And in way of these overall remarks, I would also want to say that it is important for us to then know that transparency is but the beginning, because if we are talking about sustainable development, transparency is just the beginning of that. I think beyond that, we need to also think about a comprehensive strategy for transformation. So coming to the Africa Mining Vision, which I've said will be where I'm, the framework within which I want to locate my contribution. The stated goal of the Africa Mining Vision is to create conditions or circumstances that support transparent, equitable, and optimum exploitation of Africa's mineral resources to underpin broad-based sustainable growth and socio-economic development. So this is really within the framework of the brief for this particular forum that we've been invited to. And I wanted to highlight 4 program clusters of the Africa Mining Vision that have relevance to our discussion today. And the first is program cluster number 1 of the Africa Mining Vision. And this is a program cluster that looks at mining revenues and minerals rents management. And the stated goal of that particular program cluster is to ensure that we create a sustainable and well-governed mining sector that effectively garners and deploys resource rents. So it's looking at mining revenues, particularly from the point of view of public revenues that are accruing from the mining sector. I'll say a lot more about this later on. And the second program cluster that I want to flag is program cluster number 2 of the Africa Mining Vision Action Plan. And this is a program cluster that looks at geological and mining information systems. And the stated goal is to develop a comprehensive knowledge of Africa's mineral endowment. And again, I'm going to come to this when I delve a little bit deeper into illicit financial flows and some of the areas of concern. And then there is program cluster number 5, which looks at mineral sector governance. And the stated goal there is to create a sustainable and well-governed mining sector that is inclusive and appreciated by all stakeholders, including the surrounding communities. And I think Veronica talked a lot around mineral sector governance issues. So I probably will not rehash some of the points coming from that. And the last program cluster of the Africa Mining Vision that I wanted to bring into this discussion on transparency is the one on environmental and social issues. And this is program cluster number 7. And it talks of creating a mining sector that is environmentally friendly, socially responsible, and appreciated by all stakeholders in surrounding communities. And there is great relevance even on this particular point when we are talking about transparency. So we are way beyond the financial transactions at this point, but the way that environmental impact assessments are done and approvals are given for a mining operation to begin, the way that cost-benefit analysis takes place, and beyond that, even the way by which mining operations dispose of their waste and how that impacts the environment. And for the most part, really, we are talking of this happening in a manner that is not environmentally friendly and environmentally sustainable, and that undermines the environmental rights of communities. If you look at most of our countries, the codes that were created to govern environmental and social issues go back decades, to the extent that it is much more economical for a mining operation to pollute and be charged and pay a fine than to dispose of its waste in an environmentally friendly manner, because those fines were set, most of them decades ago, and they're just completely nominal. So I think there's a lot that we can look in that particular point. So coming to the point around minerals rents and rents management, and as I've already said, that illicit financial flows is a big concern in that regard. We are talking here of leakages that are amounting to around $100 billion per year across the continent. And even this is a conservative figure, because if you look at all the methodologies that have done an estimate of this, there are methodologies that have looked at actual figures you can go and look at in terms of trade statistics and data, and they don't look at the black hole where a lot of these illicit financial flows are taking place. And when you look at this figure of illicit financial flows, at least 65% of that is from the corporate sector. So it's got nothing to do with how governments are stealing revenues. It's really it's got everything to do at how the corporate sector is under contributing or is not contributing enough towards public revenues. And when you look at that 65%, at least 75% of it is coming from the minerals sector. So there are various mechanisms that are enabling these illicit financial flows to take place. And one such mechanism is what we have called trade mispricing. And when we are looking at trade mispricing, we are talking of import over invoicing or export under invoicing. And this is where there is a misrepresentation of the price, of the quality, of the quantity of the minerals that we are extracting. And this is a big issue. There are reports that came out looking a lot at De Beers and diamond mining in South Africa and how trade mispricing, I think within a 4-year period in South Africa, accounted for over $8 billion in loss in public revenues. And when it comes to, there's a big issue there around how are we going to know the actual quantities that private companies or corporates are exporting from South Africa or any other country. And if it's a diamond, how do we tell the actual carat that you are exporting, so that we really know the price that you are exporting that at, and we can claim a fair share of public revenue. If you look at a study that was done by Khadija Sharif, and I can't remember the name of the other professor who was at UKZN, they mentioned in that study that the office that is supposed to verify the price, quality, and quantity of diamond exports in South Africa is actually funded by De Beers. And according to their own assessment, this office had become a rubber stamp of what the private corporate entity declares is exactly what is rubber stamped and is taken to be a true fact. So through that process and through the lack of transparency with regards to the prices, the quality, and the quantity of our mineral resources, we are losing billions of dollars in public revenue. The same thing happens with what is called transfer pricing, where there is trade within the same group of companies and taking advantage of the location of that conglomerate within more than one country. So we can play against differences in taxation rates from one country to the other. And when we export from Zimbabwe, we export to ourselves in Johannesburg or in Lusaka or any other country, and we manipulate prices in such a way that we pay the least tax or contribute the least to public revenue from the country that we're exporting, because it's just us who are buying it from the other end, and then we then re-export from that country. So transfer pricing is a big problem. But when you look at the mining value chain itself, as most of us would be aware, our taxation laws are such that companies are allowed to take out expenses before they declare a profit and before they are taxed. So there are various ways in which companies engage in what is called base erosion and profit shifting. And by that, you completely erode the taxable base. And there are so many mechanisms that you can do that, one of which is something that is called thin capitalization, which is basically reference to intergroup loans, where if we want to borrow money, we set up a lending company in a secret jurisdiction. It's our company, and it will lend money to us from Mauritius, and charge us the maximum possible interest on the loan, as well as the maximum possible administration fees and establishment fees on that loan, so that we erode our taxable base. And it's for that specific reason why, if you look at the biggest source of foreign direct investment into India, a country with over 1 billion people, the biggest source of investment is Mauritius, because there's all these shenanigans where companies find a secret jurisdiction, you create these companies and you launch yourself and you maximize what you can take out of that. But the same thing happens to brand fees, the same thing happens to management fees. In the establishment phase of a mining operation, we'll make sure that we maximize what we are charging as management fees. So usually when you see a company celebrating to say, like, you know, in Zimbabwe here, that we've created a $4 billion project to expand the power plant, hydropower plant in Kariba. If you unpack all of that, you see that there's a lot that's going in: consultants fees, management fees. And before you even begin to, you know, deduct, to pay taxes, you are allowed to recover all of these fees. And the other piece that I wanted to speak to is what's called unequal contracts. And this really speaks to the point around, or the importance of transparency in contract negotiation. If you, in its most basic sense, what you are really talking about here is you give away a mining concession sometimes at 10 times less than what it actually costs you, or what it's worth. So if you look at the high-level panel on illicit financial flows report that was chaired by President Thabo Mbeki, it gives the example of Guinea, where a mining concession that was worth $140 billion was sold for $165 million. I mean, this is, you know, fact, it's established. So you have an unequal contract that immediately transfers wealth into, you know, private actors and robs the nation of these resources. So unequal contracts are a huge thing, and it ties into the point I mentioned earlier when you're looking at the Africa Mining Vision, the point around geological surveys. Even it's pretty much a fact in each and every country that you'll find people who are exporting ore, raw ore for testing in South Africa for 5 years or even 10 years before the country actually discovers that this already represents an export of a precious mineral resource, whether it's to do with diamonds or with gold or the sub minerals that are found. So a company will register as a cobalt mine or something, or coal mine or something like that, but the minerals that are in there are not declared, and usually these are minerals of, you know, very high value. So in us, you know, African countries getting to know what actually, you know, is underground will help us negotiate equal contracts, and at the same time that level of transparency will help us ensure that we have maximum benefit from all the different revenue streams that we can capture, you know, from the different minerals that are found there. So just as I begin to close this, some of the things that are enabling all these shenanigans, is, you know, there are no rewards for even guessing this one. It's what's called secrecy jurisdictions. And of course, secrecy is the exact opposite of transparency. So secret jurisdictions are a key feature of the global financial architecture. And these are areas where you are told that you can come and open a bank account here, but we don't even need to know who you are. You can come and register a company. We don't even need to know who are the beneficial owners of this company. And when you don't know the beneficial owners, it means that, you know, when we're talking of even mining operations, if you are to sell and there's what's called capital gains tax, you can still sell to yourselves. And no one gets to know, because no one ever knows who's the beneficial owner of a transaction. When you are selling internationally, you can be selling to yourself, but no one knows, because these things are not declared. So this a key feature of the global financial architecture called secret jurisdictions is a big enabler of secrecy and the lack of transparency, and all those other mechanisms that I was referring to that are enabling, the loss of revenues. And the same thing applies to tax havens. Because with tax havens, we are told that if we are doing business within our jurisdiction, you pay close to no tax. So this is what now enables transfer pricing. It enables the international transactions that allow for you to play the variations in tax rates from one country to the other. So that's a big area that requires focus, and that's enabling this. And maybe the third and last one that I'll speak to is the current structure of the multinational corporation. If you look at it closely, this is a globally distributed structure. It's a incredibly complicated web that our local revenue administrators and authorities actually have no capacity to disentangle and to actually know what is happening. And when I say it's globally distributed, I mean that the financing piece is located somewhere. The marketing piece is located in another country or continent. The operational piece is located in another country or continent. And all of these are coordinated in a way to do tax management, basically, to ensure that you pay as little as possible in taxation and you hide as much revenue as possible, base erosion and profit shifting, as I was speaking to earlier. And how we lose in this particular equation, especially as the continent, and this is an area that I would encourage, whether it's students or researchers that we have on the forum, is when you look at the taxation rules in terms of international trade, these are rules that are now archaic. They were created at a time when the multinational corporation was not this complicated. It was, a single entity that you knew had arrived and you were dealing with, and it didn't have all these different, bases all over the world that are so carefully and intricately coordinated. But the taxation rules that were set are such that the areas from which finance is coming from, which this is really the global north or the west, where most of our multinational corporations that are involved in the extractive sector are based, they tax you on they tax on the basis of return on investment. Whereas areas where the companies are actually operating, the taxation rules currently are such that you tax on the basis of profits that have been made. So it's easier to erode your profit base so that you work that down close to zero. And there are companies, if you read again the HLP report, there are multinational corporations that went for 20 years without paying a single tax where they were operating, just declaring losses. So there's an argument there around reforming the global financial architecture, and particularly the way that taxation rights are distributed between capital exporting countries and capital importing countries. Then in the last 30 seconds, what I would say is that I think we really need to look at what citizens can do, what the legislature can do, and what the executive can do. And I think for citizens, it's making noise, it's the investigations, it's the exposés, it's pressing for the political will that then gets the legislature to play their role in terms of representing citizens' interest, making policy, as well as overseeing the executive. And I think we should expect or put pressure on our executive to operate within what will have been designed as policy and legislative frameworks that ensure that there's transparency and accountability in the utilization of our mineral resources. Thank you. Let me leave it at that.
Thank you so much. You really have kind of established the incredibly complicated and almost, I would say, horrific history that's just continuing of neo-colonial exports, and how we all play a really crucial role in trying to stop that. And it isn't something that we can just put put aside. There's a moral obligation behind this. But before, and I know that we began a little bit late, we do still have one panelist, Hebert McLeod, who is the country director for international growth in both Sierra Leone and Liberia. I'm so sorry if this runs over time, but I do want to give him the floor. And obviously people are willing to if you're willing to stay, that would be brilliant. Thank you so much. Without further ado, let me hand over to Hebert.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry about the technical problems. I was listening to the interventions of almost everyone. And so what I will do is just focus on the issue of transparency itself. Transparency is appealing, it's logical, but transparency is only one instrument in the arsenal towards good governance. It has the potential to improve citizens' trust, improve efficiency. It has the potential also to mobilize and utilize non-government capacity during negotiations. The capacity to dissuade corruption and abuse, promote better decision-making that is informed, and allow some participation. But we have to be very careful. There is a tendency for one to think of, to consider transparency merely as a box-ticking exercise. Without some of the accessories that would make it useful and effective, it can even be counterproductive. So for instance, one could say that, oh, I have had governments that have argued we need to have a member of the board of the company, because then, you know, there's transparency, he knows everything that's going on. The reality is that those people who are appointed are usually political appointees. They have very little interest in studying the voluminous documents required for board meetings. They get to the board meetings and, you know, they just walk away at the end of the day, get their allowances and leave. So there's a case where you can say, you know, we have a transparent arrangement because in every board we have a government representative, but that's useless. You can also have the cases of, you know, participation in negotiations. I have had some of my colleagues from civil society say, you know, there should be a community representative during negotiations. And I said, this is rubbish. If you don't, obviously when one talks about transparency, that implies that there is lack of trust between citizens and the government, because the government is supposed to represent the interests of everyone. If they are incapable of representing the interests of everyone, your solution is not to bring somebody who is only interested in one particular dimension and may only have the capacity to understand and address one or two dimensions, but not some of the intricacies involved with thin capitalization or dealing with the financing model that's involved. So when we talk about transparency, we have to be very careful to ensure that this is one element or one component of a theory of change that leads us to certain outcomes. And you can take the outcomes that have been given in the African Mining Vision as important, as useful. In fact, essential, if not necessary. But when you look at the outcomes that are searched for in the African Mining Vision, this involves a lot of trade-offs. Decisions between short-term gains and long-term benefits, between financial revenues now and development outcomes in the future. Now, these are very complex issues that should be dealt with, not through transparency, but through earlier discussions within the government and within the society that hardly ever takes place. In my experience, in contract negotiations, the most difficult part of the negotiation is not so much with the foreign company, it's internally. getting internal agreement on what we need as a nation and how far we should go as a nation. And you have political economy issues that influence the determination of a single position on that. So, this is the kind of thing that transparency doesn't necessarily resolve. I do agree that you can legislate for certain transparent practices or policies, such as beneficiary, ultimate beneficiary owners of a company, so you know who will eventually you are eventually dealing with. That's fine, but you could also do that through proper diligence in preparing for your contract. Now, the other point I want to mention is that one can, transparency is in the mineral sector is absolutely essential. I do not dispute that. But it becomes very difficult to have transparency in minerals in an environment that is full of murky deals and opaque governance in general. It's very and informal decision making. It's very difficult then for you to talk about transparency in those sense. So transparency is useful, but we must recognize it has its limitation. It has to be very carefully planned for. And we must always ensure that all the accoutrements that go with transparency are there for us to be able to realize the potential of transparency. I will end here since the time is already up.
Thank you so much, Hebert, for joining us. I am sorry about the technical difficulties we have to contend with these days. But thank you so much for bringing through that transparency requires a purpose. There needs to be a direction, and I really do appreciate your time in bringing us your insights. Yeah, there are two comments from the floor that I'll quickly just read out, and then we will close the session. First, we have the two comments from Biolongo Elise Sheloke. Good afternoon. Just two comments. One, the exploitation of African resources started well before the colonial time. In certain countries, it was happening under the slave trade. In the neo-colonial era, it happens differently. The rising influence of China in Africa is to be understood in that regard. Two, the corporate sector shares the responsibility of transparency or lack thereof, and I think government should not have any excuse. They are the custodians of policy implementation and have the capacity to also be policing what happens within the boundaries of their countries. Failure to cooperate as governments fail Africa. We expect more from our leaders to stop the illicit flow of our minerals in Africa. No excuse at all. Thank you so much. And then we have one more just quick comment from Bernard. Indeed, McLeod, without a solid foundation and background work, transparency is useless. Thank you so much. Would you like to say a last response to those two comments, or shall I close the session?
No, mine is to just acknowledge that indeed the greater part of the responsibility lies with government. And of course, in saying that, we need to really look at how can we forge stronger relationships between citizens and progressive civil society with well-minded and reform-minded aspects of government. That includes progressive legislators and even some in administration who want to make a positive, contribution. Sometimes when governments fail to act on this, it's not intentional. The issues are extremely complicated. And if we bring our resources together from researchers, investigating reporters, then legislators, then citizen voices, community voices, we stand a chance to unravel this matrix and contribute, to translating our minerals wealth into well-being and sustainable development for the continent.
I think my closing, my comment would be just that I think transparency and accountability are central pillars in the mineral governance process or framework. There are key other pillars that are also important and fundamental towards achieving sustainable development as provided by the African Mining Vision's various frameworks. But I think what's more important is a commitment by especially African governments to create a framework that sustains or that garners the effective optimization of these resources for the greater transformative good for the citizens. So it's a mixed bag of various principles and pillars that are central to the whole spectrum of good governance within the mineral resource sector. But so transparency is still a very fundamental, but coupled with other tenets and pillars towards this process of good governance.
And on that note, I'd like to thank all three of our speakers for attending today and giving us incredible insight on transparency and generally as well on good governance and what kind of principles we need to take forward and include potentially in our research. Yeah, thank you again so much, and I hope you have a lovely Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.